Welcome to De-Stress Your Business, the podcast where we show you how to get incredible results in your business without constant stress. I'm Alexis Kingsbury, a serial entrepreneur and founder at AirManual, and I'm joined by my co-founder and co-host, Paddy Mann. Morning, Paddy.
Good morning.
Morning. So most businesses wait too long before they really put a spotlight on sorting out their processes. The result? Failed hires, lots of mistakes, leaders spending all of their time supporting their team, and a ton of stress. So, when is the right time to sort out your processes? That's our topic for today. Let's find out. So, Paddy, I know that we used to have a bit of a misconception here and imagined that documenting processes should be done much later than we've subsequently sort of discovered. So, can you share a little bit about our thought process and the mistake in the thinking that we had?
Sure. So we kind of had this number in our head, and it was about $1 million or £1 million, and that's often equated to around having 10 employees or so. And I think that's a number that had been thrown around in a few blogs and articles about when you get to a point where you're scaling up and you really need to think about the processes because it starts to cause pain. I remember there's a book called Ready, Fire, Aim, which I think is a fantastic book. I would highly recommend it, but it kind of, I guess, overgeneralizes about the stages of a company's growth, and it talks about companies in the first $1 million of revenue being in their infancy and then growing up. I think there's this rapid growth stage up to 10 million, and then adolescence is 10 to 100 million, and then maturity is 100 million plus. And that all sounds fantastic. But of course, that's not the reality for most businesses. It's not the majority, the reality for the majority of businesses. Many businesses will never make it to $100 million or even $10 million, and yet they are great businesses that are doing fine. And we found, both of our own businesses and with looking elsewhere, maturity, certainly when you think about process and things being run efficiently and with low levels of stress and people enjoying their jobs, has very little to do with your company size. We know, we've been in a situation in our own businesses where we've had world-class levels of kind of process maturity when we've had less than 10 people. We've seen that happen. We've been able to help other customers, many other customers that have between 4 and 10 staff, get into a similar position. And the same applies up to between 10 and 100 and higher levels. And then we've worked with numerous companies that have had hundreds of employees, thousands of employees, tens of thousands of employees, which are doing a really bad job at some of these basics. And it may be pandemic across the whole organization. It might be localized to some teams who are getting it wrong, but it just doesn't have this kind of close correlation to the number on your revenue sheet, the number of employees you have. That's not the way to be looking at it, and that's something that actually kind of held us back and slowed us down on this area.
Yeah, no, I love that, and I think it's, as you say, it's so common to think that it's a bigger company problem, and in fact, even talking to business leaders in the past, where they might even suggest that the processes and so on, that's a corporate business sort of challenge. And of course, actually, we've both, as consultants in the past, we've both worked at organizations where they've had big gaps in their processes and are feeling the pain as a result, even when they are billion-dollar companies. It's not true to say that, you get to this particular point in the business, like say 100 million in revenue, and that then to get to the next stage, that you need that the processes in place is it helping you for that bridging. It's all the way through. And it comes down to when you've actually got the challenges, right? Of when you're struggling to free up your time, when you're making mistakes, when you're struggling to get new joiners up to speed. Those are the sorts of and various others like those. When you're hitting those challenges, that's the time to kind of be sorting out those processes and so on. But for businesses where perhaps they haven't yet done much on their processes, they're kind of thinking, I'm starting to have some of those problems that I think are described in the book by the E-Myth by Michael Gerber. He talks about how when you're really tiny, when you're 1, 2, 3 people, there's a lot of just taking turns, and you kind of cover each other, and you're aware of it. But that if you want to get out of that state, if you want to be operating more as a business owner rather than just having a job, then you need to be able to split out roles and create processes and so on. So where should someone start when they're in that situation, when it's time to start to extract themselves from some of the tasks in the business?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it basically comes down to when are you going to get into that position where you've got some processes in your business which are working, and you can see that they're working, and you can just see you're just being held back by time. So you've got a process, you know that if you sell in this way, if you deliver this quality of product, if you repeat these steps again and again, you can get more customers. And this puts you in this amazing place as a business owner, because it means you have the ability to make more money. You can go, okay, I get more employees, I get more money, and I can build this up. Brilliant. And that will likely be, certainly within your first 10 employees. It may be, depending on your company, it might be it might be that you have one founder and it's your very first employee. You're able to do that. Often it's you have a few people early on who are kind of taking on more senior roles and having to work together. So a few kind of co-founders. And then at some point you go, okay, we need to bring in someone more junior. We can't afford to find another one of us. That would, they would cost hundreds of thousands of pounds. We don't have that, but we should be able to find a more junior resource who can repeat some of these steps. And at the point that you're in that position, essentially, that's when you're able to start putting processes into place and getting the value. Because if you can take those steps that are working for you again and again and get them documented and handed over effectively, then sure, you're going to get the results you are looking for. If you don't, if you assume that you're just going to give them a kind of an outline of you need to do sales calls, you need to do these 5 tasks that I did, you're not going to get the same results. They are going to make mistakes. It is going to drive you crazy. Your first employees, I hate to say it, but more likely than not will be failed hires that end up either costing you more to support than the value they bring in, or they end up leaving the company. That is, unfortunately, it's almost like a rite of passage for so many businesses, because they assume that they'll sort their processes later. But it's like the moment that you are trying to delegate and use a more junior resource to do one of the tasks, you're going to need to start putting these in place.
Yeah, no, I love that, and it reminds me of so many businesses that we've either worked with or friends that own businesses or leaders in businesses, where they, like as you say, it's almost a rite of passage. They've all had that experience at some point of thinking, well, I need to hire. I'll bring someone in, and they haven't got the processes in place, and as a result, they have problems. I remember. A friend who runs a fantastic training business, Dominic at Inflow. I remember, quite a long time ago when he was sort of building up the sales side, and essentially brought in a salesperson who was qualified, experienced, had more years of experience than most of, or indeed all of our sales hires, and so the expectation was, okay, well, this person will come in with those skills and they'll need very little training, and as a result, we'll be able to get fantastic results. But because there weren't any other processes in place, it was a really long, slow slog, and it really and Dominic found it annoying because he had been using his CRM system in a particular way and had been following up with customers in a particular way and describing the products and having those conversations, and none of that was replicated. And so it was hard for the salesperson. They kind of feel like, well, I'm doing a good job with what I'm given, but for him, he was frustrated that their CRM system, I think they were using Pipedrive. Pipedrive wasn't up to date, and therefore he couldn't quickly see what was going on, and he couldn't see what was going on in the pipeline. And all of these things are things that actually, if they're documented as processes and as a result available to that employee, it's easier for them and reduces the stress because they know what they need to be doing, but also you can make sure they're doing a good job from the off, right? And we've had this experience ourselves. I think we've talked about in a previous episode where we hired a salesperson who had loads of experience and exactly the same. And in fact, I was talking to another business owner only last week who rather awesomely, they had had a similar problem maybe about a year and a half ago where they'd hired someone, not put the processes in place, and it had put them off hiring. And then recently, in the last 3 months, sort of got back on the horse, made that key hire, but had the processes in place. And now they're saying, "Oh, this is fantastic. Why didn't I do this sooner?" And now they're able to grow. Suddenly, she's not the bottleneck for all sales. This is Sonia, at Heads Up, and she's able to grow the business and spend more time on delivery and spend time with her customers and all these sorts of things. So it's absolutely fantastic when you're able to break through that, right? But I think that one of the concerns people have is that if I put a focus on processes, if I do this, we're early stages, there's only a few of us and so on. If we spend so much time on processes, won't that slow us down? And I've also heard it described as, oh, well, so much is changing. How can we possibly document our process? And maybe we have to wait until everything's, sort of not changing, and then we'll document it and embed it that way. So, speak to some of those misconceptions, and particularly that concept of doesn't doing this slow you down rather than help you speed up?
Yeah, well, you describe it as a misconception. I think there's some truth in it, which is that if there are processes which, at this point in time, in this point in your growth, aren't well understood, then bringing someone else in and trying to either just bring a junior resource and expect them to be able to do it on their own is going to be unlikely to work. It's also unlikely to work is if you just simply document what you think is probably needed and then kind of hand it over without being there for them. And for us, I've experienced that pain trying to work out some of the, me and you, we bring in a lot of sales experience, finance experience, engineering experience, and so on. One of our weaker areas as a business is understanding marketing and how those processes work. And so when we try to get other people involved in the marketing team, either by hiring directly or bringing other internal resource across to the marketing team, it doesn't work out when we haven't been in there and tested it ourselves to understand what works. Because you try to systemize, you try to put a structure around something which hasn't been tested yet. And not only does it not help because you put around a structure around something which doesn't get the results that you expected, but it can slow you down because you're then feeling less flexible about the fact that what you're really doing is testing different hypotheses and you're treating this as a project. So the key to it, it not slowing you down, and indeed what it should be doing is it should be speeding you up, it should be freeing up your time, it should be making life more enjoyable, it should be helping you to avoid these big stresses, is to find the places where it is a well understood process, and how it works, what results you expect at the end, you've seen it end to end, and so you're able to give the guidance, you're able to manage it. You know what results that you expect out the end each time, so you're able to go, okay, wait a minute, we've had 10 sales calls, but we haven't had a single customer come out the end. I would have expected it to be at this kind of level. And so you can provide that managing, you can provide that coaching, and so on. And so the key is to make sure that you are focusing on those things. And when you do, and I say the time to start is once you've got processes where you are able to start documenting and delegating. That should be your kind of starting point because you are deciding to hire. Then you need to focus on finding out, working out which processes are really well, clear in my mind about how I would do them. You might not have written them down, but you've got a process in your head about what you do on every call or whatever. Start systemizing those, and where there are gaps, you can be looking at this new employee and going, okay, what's all the things that I'm hoping that they can do? If there's a gap where you understand exactly how one of the tasks should work, but there's another task and you want them to take it on, and yet, frankly, you've not done it before, it hasn't been tested, then you have to acknowledge that and go, this is a process which I need them to take over. It hasn't been tested so I'm going to need to be involved in that testing process until we're happy and we're both happy, and then it can be handed over. And if you do that, if you get clear on the whole guidance, you document the ones which are really clearly understood already, you identify the ones that still need to be tested and actually test it. Sure, that introduces you having to do some testing, but trust me, you needed to do it anyway. It's just about whether you do it now or in 2 years after you've hired and fired a few people. Then then you're going to start seeing the big benefits, and it will speed you up so much. The stories you just shared, you got this person, they've hired someone into their team, it didn't work out, and they're now repeating the exercise, and you're celebrating the fact that they're repeating this exercise a year later. And we've both said, this is often a rite of passage. Basically, most businesses get derailed, knocked back by an entire year or more by not getting this right the first time. And so, yeah, absolutely, it should be speeding you up.
Yeah, indeed, and of course the reason it was caused for, partly the reason it was caused for celebration is there was no guarantee that either that she'd go again and approach it, because at the time that I had the conversation with her, she was kind of turned off to that as an approach, as being like, we tried this and it didn't work, so I'm very reluctant. And so, it was only through encouragement, through her wider business network and coaches and all those sorts of things, that kind of got to that point. And we went through a similar experience ourselves. I think it was probably a year or maybe a year and a half between us having a failed sales hire and then doing it. And I remember one of our coaches and mentors, Dan Bradbury, like literally in a session saying, I think you should do this. And I said, no, we've tried it before. And I remember one of his favorite sayings is, well, I'm right and you're smart, so given enough time, you'll realize I'm right. And sure enough, he was. We just need to do it in a better way. And I think partly one of the reasons that you are more likely to do it right the second time around is because you're more cautious. You're more cautious around not just assuming that, if I hire a salesperson, this will be successful, but instead getting really clear about what are the metrics they need to hit, what are the activities they need to be doing, how do they need to do those activities. But yeah, I think for every role you hire into, your chances of success are significantly higher when you've got that clarity of how things need to be done, the processes and the steps. And note that we had a client who they had embraced processes to address these things, but there were some prerequisites that need to be in place, including, I mentioned there the metrics. What's the frequency of the activities that you need to be doing, and what's the output results that you're expecting? Because it isn't enough just to tell people how to do things. You do need to set some expectations about how frequently and what results are expected, and then measure that so that you can make sure that you're getting the results. Because exactly as you say, if you document a process that either you think is working, but it turns out you hadn't got it quite right, or you're not sure, running the process won't automatically get you the results. And so, I think you need that in place, and that's a really key step for sort of catapulting the growth and so on.
And
So,
something we've talked about in the early episodes of the podcast is the need to get the meeting processes in place. And
yes.
When you're approaching process, there's looking at the specific role about the tasks they're going to be doing. But it also, by getting your process mindset on it, also helps you to think about the wider structures that you need. So you're going to need to have meetings with your team. Ideally, they're going to be weekly. We also normally have daily ones within our teams to keep the pulse. And you have to go back to listen to those episodes to we'll explain just why they add so much value rather than, again, slowing you down. And there's a load of additional processes which you're going to become more aware of and deliver a load of value when you get your head around how they can work, and things like performance management. So doing weekly one-to-ones, doing performance reviews with your team to give them timely feedback. Obviously onboarding, but thinking both about your company and your role onboarding. And when you first when you first start introducing the processes and the way of starting to document, then actually none of these things are often going to exist. So there can be a huge gap. But by starting to create a system in your company for how you capture these things, for how you put it into place, it allows you to start slowly knocking them down and putting them into place, and essentially putting on all these things that will create a much better environment for the employee to thrive, and for you to be able to support them and to reduce your stress. So it's certainly a journey as you grow a company, but this is what you've got yourself into, and by embracing it early, it allows you to put those things in place that makes such a difference as you grow.
Yeah, love that. Good summary. Fantastic. Well, we'll close it there. But as regular listeners will know, we do run a weekly webinar on how to free up 15 hours per week and remove the constant stress of running a business without slowing down growth. And particularly that point around without slowing down growth is a key focus for that session, in which we'll show you exactly how to make sure that you don't have to slow down as a result of putting some of these structures in place and reducing the stress and so on. Typically, those webinars are every Wednesday at 1 p.m. UK time, but you can find out more and register for the next one at www.airmanual.co/webinar. And final note for those on social media listening to our podcast, we need your help in terms of getting this message out to other people and helping as many people as we can. So if you found today's content valuable, please like it, share it, post on it, subscribe, and if you're listening on the podcast, just take a minute to leave an honest review. We'd really, really appreciate it, and ultimately it allows us to help more people. Otherwise, until next time, have fun.